What if the story you've been told about the Great Pyramid is merely the surface of a deeper memory, one so old it no longer fits inside the neat boundaries of history? What if the monument that dominates the Giza plateau is not a tomb, nor simply a feat of engineering, but a fragment of a civilization that understood the world differently than we do? In the familiar tale, it is a construction project ordered by a king. But what if the pyramid is older than the king himself? Older than the kingdom, older than the desert sands that bury and reveal civilizations like the tides of a forgotten ocean? And what if its true purpose was never meant to be understood by a world that had long since forgotten the language in which it was originally written? You can sense it the moment you let your mind drift away from the textbooks and towards something more instinctual and quiet. The feeling that this structure was not designed by hands that simply moved stone, but by minds that moved time. A monument aligned to the sky, humming with mathematical precision, whispering something about cycles, about resets, about a memory that stretches beyond recorded history. It feels less like a tomb and more like a machine, a message, a hinge between ages that have risen and collapsed long before Egypt itself took its first breath. Some truths survive not as words, but as stone, and some stones outlive the stories built around them. If you enjoy these quiet explorations into the forgotten edges of human history, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if it feels right in this moment. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time has this story found you? The visuals you see on screen are there only to offer context. You don't need to watch a single frame to follow this journey. So take a deep breath, settle in, dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's walk into the mystery together. You find yourself in the early morning light, standing on the Giza plateau before the tourists arrive, before the sound of buses and the murmured conversations of visitors. In this moment, the desert feels like another planet. Quiet, pale, suspended somewhere between night and day. The Great Pyramid rises before you, not as an icon or a cliché, but as a looming wall of weathered limestone, its blocks stretching upward with a stubbornness that feels almost alive. You can see the thin cracks between the stones, traces of ancient erosion, the faint shadow where the casing stones once gleamed so brightly they reflected the sun like a lighthouse of antiquity. The silence is overwhelming. It is a silence that presses on your ears, as if the air itself has paused out of respect for the monument. You step closer until the stones tower above you like cliffs. These are not the neat, polished surfaces shown in schoolbook illustrations. They are massive, rugged, each one weighing as much as a small car, stacked with an accuracy that feels unreasonable for a construction site dated to 4,500 years ago. Archaeologists often point to the nearby quarry, explaining that these blocks were carved, shaped, and transported by teams of laborers. But as you glide your hand along the cold, ancient surface, another question rises. Why would a tomb require this level of precision? Why would a burial chamber need to be aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, with internal passages that trace stellar alignments and chambers that resonate at harmonic frequencies? Why would a mortuary project require geometry so exact that modern instruments struggle to replicate it? The official explanation says, a pharaoh wanted to secure his journey into the afterlife. But standing here, beneath the quiet immensity of the stone, that story feels too small, The first clue lies not in the pyramid itself, but in a chamber deep within its heart, the king's chamber. Though the name was given by modern researchers, the chamber contains no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no sign of funerary use. Instead, there is an empty granite box, hewn from a single piece of rock harder than the tools available at the time. The chamber's geometry is exact to the millimeter. The air feels strangely charged. Engineers who have spent time inside describe a peculiar sense of pressure, like standing inside a space designed to channel something other than physical bodies. You imagine the workers who supposedly carved this room using copper chisels and pounding stones. You picture them hauling granite beams weighing upwards of 70 tons through narrow ascending corridors. You picture the ramps, the scaffolding, the logistics. And you know, as many quietly admit, that the numbers do not add up. Not the manpower, not the time frame, not the engineering capability. But the story grows even stranger when you turn to the exterior. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with such accuracy that even modern compasses drift slightly off by comparison. Researchers attempting to replicate its orientation using ancient tools discovered that even with perfect weather, perfect visibility, and a perfectly flat horizon, the margin of error would be far larger than what the pyramid displays. Some proposed that the builders tracked a pair of circumpolar stars. Others suggested that the Earth's axis may have shifted since the monument's completion. Still others quietly implied something older, something that required observational data from centuries, perhaps millennia, of sky watching. Then there are the shafts, narrow, angled channels that lead nowhere, too small for human passage, yet cut with precision so exact that even high-tech robotic crawlers struggle to navigate their confines. One shaft in particular points directly toward Orion's belt, an alignment that matches the night sky not of 2500 BCE, but of a much older epoch. Another shaft aligns with Sirius, another with the northern circumpolar stars. These are not architectural accidents. They are messages in stone. Mainstream Egyptology explains them as symbolic air shafts, meant to allow the pharaoh's spirit to ascend to the stars, aligning with the god Osiris. But the shafts have no soot, no marks of airflow, no connection to any ventilation system. The idea that they were spiritual pathways feels poetic, but not structural. Layer by layer, the anomalies accumulate. In 1837, British explorer John Perring documented a curious trench on the south side of the pyramid containing strange, vitrified stone. Fragments that appeared glazed, as if exposed to intense heat. Contemporary researchers have noted similar melting around some casing stones, though this detail rarely reaches textbooks. If the stones were shaped using copper tools, why do some show signs of heating beyond what copper furnaces could produce? And why is the vitrification found in specific, isolated areas rather than across the entire structure? There is also the matter of the foundation. Beneath the pyramid lies a limestone bedrock platform that was cut and leveled with precision, bordering on impossible. Modern engineers who surveyed the site noted that the foundation deviates by less than 1 inch across its entire footprint, over 13 acres. The tools required to achieve such leveling accuracy remain a matter of debate. Some propose water leveling methods. Others suggest wooden sighting devices. But no replication has ever produced such consistency at such a scale. Then there is the curious fact that the Great Pyramid is part of a larger complex, whose layout seems to mirror the sky itself. The three pyramids of Giza correspond, with striking precision, to the three stars of Orion's belt, but not as they appear today. Their positions match a reflection of the stars as they would have appeared around 10,500 BCE, long before the rise of dynastic Egypt. Mainstream Egyptology acknowledges the astronomical interest of the ancient Egyptians, but rarely entertains the idea that the Giza Plateau may encode memories of a far older sky. Yet, when you place the stars over the plateau using astronomical software, the connection becomes difficult to ignore. Another anomaly arises from the pyramid's internal geometry. The slope angle of its sides, about 51.84 degrees, is mathematically significant. It is almost exactly the angle required to generate a perfect golden ratio triangle when combined with the pyramid's height. The ratio of the perimeter of the base to the height is nearly equal to 2p, suggesting the builders understood the relationship between a circle and its radius. These mathematical relationships do not occur by accident. They reflect an underlying system of knowledge that predates what classical history assigns to the Old Kingdom. Archaeologists often counter that ancient peoples possessed practical geometry, not abstract mathematics. But the pyramid's design demonstrates a grasp of constants that require advanced abstraction, constants not formally documented until thousands of years later. As you stand before the monument in your imagination, another detail emerges. The casing stones that once covered the pyramid were polished Tura limestone, fitted so tightly that a credit card could not slide between them. When intact, these casing stones would have formed a perfectly smooth surface, glistening white in the sun. The entire structure would have shone like a beacon, visible for miles across the desert. Even today, small remnants of the casing at the base show how flawlessly they were joined. Egyptologists explain this as aesthetic stonework, nothing more. But high-precision casing is unnecessary for a tomb. Tombs do not require exact angles, perfect geometric slopes, or polished reflective surfaces. Tombs do not require shafts aligned to celestial markers. Tombs do not require harmonic chambers that resonate at specific frequencies. Tombs do not require granite blocks transported from quarries hundreds of miles away. Yet all these features are present. Imagine a civilization, not necessarily more advanced in a technological sense, but advanced in ways we no longer understand, that used geometry, astronomy, and stonework as part of a larger cultural or cosmological language. Imagine that the pyramid was not built to entomb a body, but to preserve a concept, a memory, a function. Perhaps a device that interacted with the Earth's energy fields, or tracked long-term astronomical cycles, or served as a stabilizing marker for epochs of change. Perhaps something more subtle, like a time capsule of mathematics meant to survive global resets. This is where mainstream interpretation pushes back. Egyptology rests on the premise that civilizations progress in a linear trajectory. Stone tools before bronze, bronze before iron, simple societies before complex ones. To propose an older, more capable culture disrupts this neat timeline. It forces questions about lost technologies, forgotten knowledge, or civilizations erased by cataclysm. So the official explanation remains. The pyramid was built around 2500 BCE by Khufu, using a workforce of skilled laborers and seasonal workers. The blocks were cut from quarries, transported using sledges, and stacked using ramps. The alignment to the cardinal directions was achieved through careful observation of the stars. But when you examine each of these points closely, they begin to wobble. The ramps required to build the pyramid would have needed more material than the pyramid itself. A mile-long ramp with a gentle slope would have required constant reconstruction as the pyramid grew taller. Spiral ramps would block the corners and make precise alignment impossible. Internal ramps have been proposed, but no evidence of such ramps has been found. The dating of the pyramid to Khufu relies heavily on a single controversial cartouche found in a relieving chamber above the king's chamber. Letters that some researchers argue were forged or mistakenly identified. Without that inscription, the link becomes circumstantial at best, and the tools used, copper chisels, are insufficient to cut granite with such precision. Modern replicators have struggled, even with better tools, to achieve the surface finish seen on some pyramid stones. Granite is harder than copper. The idea that thousands of tons of it were shaped using such tools is difficult to reconcile with physics. But the anchor concept that ties all this together isn't the notion of aliens or advanced machines or impossible technologies. It is the quiet possibility that the pyramid is not a tomb, but a relic of a pre-existing knowledge system, one that saw the earth, the sky, and human civilization as part of a unified cycle. A cultural technology rather than a mechanical one. A symbolic machine of stone meant to preserve knowledge across eras of upheaval. As you drift deeper into this thought, you imagine a desert not yet a desert. A climate greener, wetter, more alive. You imagine a people who tracked the stars not for myth but for survival, marking the great cycles of precession and celestial shifts. You imagine an event or series of events, floods, droughts, cosmic disturbances, that compelled them to encode what they knew into structures that could outlast time itself. Perhaps the pyramid was the final chapter of a civilization fading into memory. Or perhaps it was the first chapter of a new one, built upon the ruins of the old. When you step inside the Great Pyramid in your mind, you feel the acoustics shift. The walls absorb and amplify sound simultaneously. A low hum forms in the back of your mind, as if the space resonates with something beyond human hearing. Some researchers have measured standing wave patterns inside the chamber, harmonics that align with frequencies used in meditation and ancient ritual. Others have suggested that the combination of geometry, stone density, and chamber placement creates a form of architectural resonance. Mainstream scholars dismiss these ideas as pseudo-archaeology, but the acoustics are real, the geometry is real, the alignment is real. The question is not whether these features exist, but why they were necessary for a tomb. The more you examine the pyramid, the clearer it becomes that its design is not arbitrary. Its proportions encode pi and the golden ratio, its layout mirrors the heavens, its chambers tune to frequencies, its orientation aligns with Earth's axis. These are not the hallmarks of a simple burial. They are the hallmarks of intentional design, rooted in a worldview fundamentally different from our own. Some propose that the pyramid functioned as a geodetic marker, defining a prime meridian long before Greenwich existed. Others suggest it recorded astronomical cycles, predicting precession, solstices, or even cosmic events. Still others explore the idea that the pyramid interacted with the Earth's electromagnetic field, though this remains speculative. But beneath all these theories lies a deeper question. Who were the people who first conceived of this structure, and what happened to them? The ancient Egyptians themselves claimed descent from earlier gods and demigods, figures said to rule for thousands of years before dynastic history began. The Sumerians told similar stories of antediluvian kings. The Greeks spoke of an age before the flood. Cultures across the world share myths of a golden age that ended abruptly, followed by a rebuilding from remnants. Could the pyramid be a survivor of such an age? The desert wind sweeps across the plateau, carrying grains of sand through cracks in the stone. Each grain is like a second of time, slow but relentless. And yet the structure endures, impervious to the erosion of memory. You feel as if you are standing at the threshold of two histories, the official one, clean and linear, and the hidden one, chaotic and cyclical, recorded not in ink, but in architecture. And it is here, in this quiet tension between the known and the unknown, that the deeper story begins to surface. The Great Pyramid may not answer these questions outright, but it invites them. It stands as a challenge, a monument that refuses to be reduced to a tomb or a construction project. Its stones whisper a deeper truth, that human history is not a straight line, but a spiral, and like all spirals, it returns to old points, old memories, old mysteries. Perhaps the pyramid is one such memory, a message carved in stone across eras. And perhaps the question is not how the Egyptians built it, but who taught them to. In this early morning stillness, with the desert cool against your skin and the pyramid rising like a mountain of memory before you, you feel the presence of a story that has not yet been fully told, a story that stretches back into the deep past, beyond dynasties, beyond empires, into a world where the horizon between myth and history was not yet divided. And as you stand there, the first light of dawn touches the apex of the pyramid, illuminating a single point, a point that feels less like a beginning and more like the echo of something ancient calling forward through time. It is only the first step into the mystery. The light at the tip of the Great Pyramid lingers in your memory as you shift now into the deeper chambers of the story. A story that stretches through stone corridors, lost epochs, and the quiet rhythm of civilizations rising and collapsing long before ours. If Part 1 invited you into the silence of dawn on the Giza Plateau, Part 2 carries you inward into the logic of anomalies themselves, stacking piece upon piece until the official tale begins to tremble beneath its own weight. You picture yourself returning to that same plateau days later, not at sunrise, but under a heavy twilight. The sky has darkened into a purple shade, and the edges of the pyramid appear almost black against the fading horizon. A memory from earlier lingers, how the monument seemed to resist the simplistic explanations we inherit through school books. Now, with nightfall settling around you, the structure appears even less like a tomb and more like a monolith containing layers of meaning meant for a different kind of mind, one built on cycles, mathematics, and celestial awareness. As you walk closer in this imagined twilight, you sense that the pyramid carries a weight beyond its stones. The air around it feels charged, as if the structure still hums with the remnants of its original purpose. You pause, tracing the faint remains of casing stones at the base. They reflect the last hints of light, shimmering with the memory of a time when the entire pyramid glowed brilliantly in the sun, like a beacon across the desert. This is your entry into the next layer of the mystery, how every fragment of evidence, when examined calmly and without preconceived boundaries, points toward a truth more complex than the common narrative allows. One of these fragments lies beneath your feet, not in the stones you can see, but in the bedrock hidden below. The leveling of the foundation is almost uncanny. Engineers who surveyed it with modern equipment marveled at the precision. Less than 1 inch of deviation across a base spanning over 13 acres. They questioned the mechanisms ancient workers supposedly used. Water trenches? Possibly. Wooden leveling tools? Maybe. But even the most generous reconstructions struggle to match the accuracy displayed. It is an engineering feat that does not fit comfortably within the technological capabilities attributed to the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom. But the anomalies do not end there. When archaeologists first explored the subterranean chamber beneath the pyramid, they found something curious. Irregular, unfinished surfaces carved into the bedrock. Some researchers interpreted this as evidence of rushed construction, but others saw something different, something older. What if the lower chamber is not a failure or an abandoned idea, but a remnant of a much earlier plan, one predating the final pyramid as we see it today? What if the structure itself is layered, like geological strata, encoding different epochs of construction, destruction, and rebuilding? The deeper you go into these ideas, the more you encounter a recurring theme. The possibility that the pyramid is not a single project, but a palimpsest of ancient knowledge. A design inherited, adapted, and repurposed across ages. Many cultures speak of inherited structures, places so ancient their true origins dissolve into myth. The Egyptians themselves referred to their earliest monumental builders as the followers of Horus, a lineage shrouded in secrecy. Texts from later dynasties describe these figures as possessing knowledge passed down from even earlier beings, the Shemsu Hor, whose rule stretched back into the thousands of years before the flood. It is within this quiet suggestion that another anomaly arises. Erosion. On the Sphinx, weathering patterns indicate exposure to heavy rainfall, something the Giza Plateau hasn't seen in over 7,000 years. Some geologists push the date even further back, suggesting periods of intense precipitation around 10,000 to 12,000 BCE. While Egyptologists dismiss this evidence, the erosion lines remain, etched into stone like wrinkles on an ancient face. The Sphinx enclosure tells a story of water, not desert winds. And if the Sphinx is older than previously assumed, then what of the structures nearby? What of the pyramids? This is where mainstream pushback comes sharply into focus. Egyptologists insist that all major structures on the Giza Plateau date to the 4th dynasty. They argue that the similarities in stonework, the cultural context, and the cartouche attributed to Khufu point to a specific time period. They explain the erosion as the result of occasional flash floods and groundwater seepage. They dismiss astronomical alignments as coincidental or the products of symbolic religious beliefs. They rely on pottery shards, inscriptions, and stylistic analysis to keep the timeline intact. And yet, for all their certainty, the foundation of their argument is surprisingly narrow. The single cartouche linking the Great Pyramid to Khufu has been a matter of debate for over a century. The interior chambers lack inscriptions entirely. The tools found nearby are insufficient to explain the precise granite work inside the structure. And the astronomical alignments, though chalked up to spiritual symbolism, match epochs far older than the assigned dates. This tension between the mainstream and emerging perspectives is not a battle of academics versus dreamers. It is a quiet acknowledgement that the evidence does not sit neatly in one category or the other. The anomalies remain stubborn. The data remain strange, and each new discovery adds another crack in the conventional story. Consider the acoustic properties of the king's chamber. Researchers have measured standing waves forming at specific frequencies, around 440 Hz, and multiples thereof. This is not speculation. It is measurable. The granite beams above the chamber, stacked in a series of relieving layers, are arranged in a way that produces resonant harmonics. Why would a tomb need this? Why would any burial chamber require resonance at all? Mainstream Egyptology offers no clear explanation. Some dismiss it as accidental. Others avoid the topic entirely. But acoustics in ancient structures are rarely accidental. Similar resonances have been documented in megalithic sites across the world, from Newgrange in Ireland to the Hypogeum in Malta. These structures are often older than the pyramids, and many display sound behaviors linked to ritual or symbolic practices. Then there is the question of electricity. Not in the sense of wires or generators, but in the sense of static charge. Some visitors report tingling sensations when touching the granite box inside the king's chamber. Others note that compasses behave strangely near certain areas of the structure. A few researchers have proposed that the pyramid's design could influence electromagnetic fields, pointing to its shape, five-sided if you include the indentations on each face, and its orientation. While such theories remain speculative, the phenomena themselves are verifiable. There is something unusual about the chamber, something that implies a function beyond simple interment. Another anomaly emerges from the so-called boat pits near the Great Pyramid. In the 1950s, archaeologists unearthed a fully dismantled cedar boat, preserved in remarkable condition. The boat was reassembled and is now displayed in the nearby museum. Its craftsmanship is exquisite, its purpose unclear. Mainstream scholars argue it was intended for the pharaoh's journey in the afterlife. But the boat's construction suggests it was seaworthy, perhaps used in actual voyages. Why would a desert civilization bury a seaworthy vessel next to a monument? What memory of water, of distant shores did they carry? And why cedar, a wood not native to Egypt? Why transport such material from Lebanon unless it held symbolic or functional significance? The boat seems to hint at a culture with maritime capabilities that do not align with the standard portrayal of Old Kingdom Egypt. Layered atop these anomalies is another question entirely: the mathematical knowledge encoded in the pyramid's proportions. When you take the height and multiply it by 2, then divide the perimeter by that number, you get an approximation of pi, accurate to within a margin so small it suggests intentional design. If the Egyptians built the pyramid using only practical geometry, as mainstream scholars assert, then how did they arrive at such an elegant expression of a mathematical constant? How did they encode both the golden ratio and pi in a single structure without formal mathematical notation? The counter-argument is that these relationships are coincidental. But coincidences of this magnitude, precise to several decimal places, raise more questions than they answer. Could it be that the builders understood the earth as a sphere? Could it be that they used the pyramid as a geodetic marker, mapping longitudes and latitudes across the globe? The Great Pyramid lies near the geographical center of Earth's landmass. Its meridian divides continents in near equal proportions. Again, mainstream scholarship attributes this to chance. But chance, at some point, becomes a pattern. This brings us to the anchor concept that threads through the entire mystery, the idea that the pyramid served as a cosmological instrument, a device for measuring, preserving, or aligning with cycles of the earth and sky. Not a machine in a technological sense, but a symbolic machine crafted with such intentionality that its purpose would span generations, surviving floods, droughts, invasions, and civilizational collapse. Imagine a world long before recorded history, a world where knowledge was passed through stone rather than writing, where astronomy was not a hobby but a necessity, where cataclysms shaped the landscape and forced survivors to encode their understanding into monuments meant to endure. Imagine a culture whose worldview was less about kings and more about cycles, great cycles of the Earth's wobble, the precession of the equinoxes, the shift of the stars across millennia. The Great Pyramid fits this worldview perfectly. Its alignment to true north, its stellar shafts, its geometric precision, its acoustic properties, all these elements make sense if the builders sought to create a structure that communicated with the cosmos. Perhaps it tracked time, not in years or centuries, but in eons. Perhaps it stabilized a memory, the memory of a sky that once looked different, a climate that once thrived, a civilization that once stood on the edge of the Nile or somewhere else entirely before the sands swallowed their cities. But this leads to an even more unsettling idea. What if the pyramid was built not as a creation of a new civilization, but as a remembrance of an older one? A monument carrying forward the knowledge of a world that ended abruptly? This is where the idea of cataclysm surfaces again. Many cultures speak of a great flood, an event that reshaped the earth. Geological evidence points to dramatic climate fluctuations around the end of the last ice age, including sudden sea level rise, massive glacial melt events, and possible cosmic impacts. If a civilization existed during that period, 10,000 to 12,000 BCE, it would have faced catastrophic upheaval. Survivors, scattered and traumatized, might have sought to preserve their knowledge in ways that could endure even the harshest resets. Stone endures, myths endure, mathematics endures. The Great Pyramid, in this sense, becomes a lighthouse across time, shining not outward but forward, toward us. The internal tensions of this theory become more pronounced when you examine the pyramid's missing capstone. The structure as we see it today ends in a flat platform. The capstone, called the Ben in ancient accounts, has never been found. Was it removed, stolen, destroyed, or never installed? Some esoteric traditions claim the capstone held symbolic significance, representing the completion of a cycle or the pinnacle of spiritual understanding. Others suggest it was made of a different material, perhaps metal, or a form of polished stone that did not survive. Egyptology, meanwhile, largely ignores the missing apex. It is treated as a minor detail, not worth investigation. But the top of the pyramid is not a minor detail. In a structure defined by geometry and precision, the capstone would have been the keystone of the entire symbolic system. Its absence speaks volumes, perhaps of a story interrupted or a message incomplete. You move now in your imagination into the inner corridors of the pyramid, not the well-lit tourist paths, but the narrow passages few have walked. The air grows heavy. Dust drifts through beams of artificial light. The walls press close. You can feel the weight of the structure above you, millions of tons resting on your shoulders. And in this confined silence, you consider another anomaly: the precision of the ascending passage. It is a steep, narrow corridor with walls aligned so perfectly that even minor variations would have caused deviations over its length. The floor is polished smooth, as if many feet once walked upon it. But whose feet? Workers, priests, initiates, or those belonging to a culture we no longer have a name for? At the top of the passage lies the Grand Gallery, a tall, corbelled corridor that feels less like a hallway and more like a resonant chamber. Its sloping walls, carved with impossible precision, create acoustics unlike any other part of the structure. Clap your hands, and the sound bounces in strange, lingering echoes. Whisper, and the walls seem to carry your voice. It feels theatrical, ritualistic, purposeful. The conventional explanation describes the Grand Gallery as a structural component meant to distribute weight and support the granite beams above the king's chamber. While this may be true to an extent, it does not explain the acoustics, the symmetry, or the deliberate shaping of the walls. A purely functional corridor would not require such elegance. The gallery feels like a place where sound and light mattered, where ritual, resonance, or alignment played a role. This is where the deeper story begins to form. Not a story that contradicts the Egyptians' achievements, but one that enriches them. The Egyptians were extraordinary builders, astronomers, and mathematicians. But they also inherited traditions, myths, and symbols from earlier cultures. They described cycles, Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods walked among humans. Whether these gods were literal beings, ancestral heroes, or symbols of vanished civilizations remains unclear. But the Egyptians revered this first time as the foundation of all later knowledge. What if the Great Pyramid is the last great monument of Zep Tepi, a relic carried into the dynastic world? What if the Egyptians maintained, repaired, or reinterpreted structures built before their era, just as medieval builders incorporated Roman walls into their castles? What if the Fourth Dynasty did not build the pyramid from scratch, but restored or expanded an older design? This is not a call to discard Egyptian ingenuity. It is a call to see them as heirs, not originators. A culture that carried ancient knowledge forward through its own lens, preserving fragments of a world lost to catastrophe. And what of the catastrophe itself? What event could erase a civilization advanced enough to leave behind a monument like the Great Pyramid? Geological evidence points to abrupt climate shifts, megafloods, and impact events. The Younger Dryas period, roughly 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, saw sudden temperature drops and dramatic environmental upheaval. Some scientists propose a comet impact, others a series of solar flares. Whatever the cause, it marked a turning point for humanity. Cultures disappeared, landscapes changed, survivors clung to whatever knowledge they could salvage. The Egyptians, thousands of years later, may have inherited the remnants of this ancient understanding. Their myths remember it, their structures hint at it, their hieroglyphs depict gods arriving by boat, bringing law, architecture, astronomy. Could these stories be distant echoes of a real, forgotten past? As you stand at the threshold between these possibilities, the pyramid looms above, not just as a monument, but as a question. A question carved into stone, enduring through ages. What if this structure remembers a world that came before? The more you contemplate it, the more the pieces begin to align like the stars above. The mathematics, the astronomy, the acoustics, the engineering, they all point toward a purpose deeper than a pharaoh's tomb, a purpose tied to cycles, memory, and continuity, a purpose that whispers across millennia, urging us to see that history may not be linear, but circular, that civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, that each era inherits the ruins of the last. As twilight deepens into night, you imagine the sky above the pyramid thousands of years ago, Orion's belt rising over the horizon, Sirius gleaming in the east, the Milky Way stretching across the desert like a river of stars. Perhaps the builders saw the heavens not as distant or symbolic, but as a map, a guidebook for survival. You take one final look at the pyramid, silhouetted against the stars, and feel the weight of the mystery settle into your bones. Whatever the true story is, it is older, stranger, and more profound than the one you were taught. It is a story written not in ink, but in stone, waiting patiently for those willing to listen. And somewhere within this story, a deeper revelation waits, one that bridges the ancient catastrophe with our modern world. Night settles over the Giza plateau like a velvet curtain, deep and quiet, and the pyramid becomes a silhouette, sharp, immense, patient. You stand at its base in your mind, feeling the chill that rolls in after sunset, a cold that seems to brim not only from the desert air, but from the stones themselves, as if the structure holds an ancient memory of climates long gone. This is where the final movement of the story begins, not with answers, but with the slow unveiling of a grand theory, a gentle ascent into the possibility that the Great Pyramid is more than a monument, more than a tomb, more than any single explanation. It is a surviving chapter of a much older book, one whose earlier pages have been burned by time, flood, and silence. You let your imagination sink into this quiet desert night, and the pyramid seems less like a building and more like a frozen moment of intention, an idea made solid, meant to echo through eras. This is where we gather the threads from every anomaly, every inconsistency, every unspoken tension between mainstream accounts and unaccepted possibilities, and trace them into one coherent hypothesis. Not the truth, because the truth remains buried, but a shape, a contour, a story that could make sense of everything the stones whisper. The anchor concept rises slowly from the depth of these thoughts. The Great Pyramid as a cosmic stabilizer, a structure designed not merely to honor a king, but to encode the relationship between earth and sky, between cycles of destruction and renewal. A monument built to remember and perhaps to prepare. Imagine a catastrophic event thousands of years before the Old Kingdom, a global disruption that rewrote coastlines, drowned cities, and forced human cultures into near oblivion. Geological evidence today recognizes sudden sea level rises of more than 100 meters around the end of the last ice age. Massive meltwater pulses reshaped the continents. Temperatures plummeted, then skyrocketed. Couleutes of soot found in ice cores hint at vast wildfires or cosmic material burning through the atmosphere. And ancient myths worldwide describe floods, falling skies, burning horizons. Now imagine a civilization living before this collapse, not a high-tech culture in the modern sense of wires, circuits, and electronics, but a culture with a mastery of stone, astronomy, geometry, agriculture, navigation, and cosmology. A civilization whose knowledge was built around the rhythms of the earth and stars, not machines. A society whose world was shattered by cataclysm, whose survivors scattered across continents, carrying fragments of their inherited wisdom like seeds across deserts. In this vision, the pyramid is the flowering of one such seed, the last grand expression of a memory older than dynastic Egypt. Step back into this imagined era, long before Khufu. The Nile Valley is green, lush, and vibrant, not just a narrow ribbon of fertility, but a wide savanna dotted with lakes and forests. Rain falls regularly. The Sahara is not a wasteland, but a mosaic of grasslands. Human settlements thrive along waterways and fertile plains. These people look to the stars not with curiosity alone, but with necessity. The sky is their clock, their compass, and their genetic memory. They track the slow drift of the equinoxes, precession, over thousands of years. They mark the rising of Orion, the cycle of Sirius, the tilt of the Earth. They understand that the cosmos is not static. It shifts, cycles, breathes. And they understand that the Earth itself is precarious. This perhaps gives rise to a profound cultural imperative: to preserve what they know in a way that cannot be erased by flood, fire, or time. They build in stone because stone survives. They encode mathematics not through symbols, but through architecture, because buildings endure where books burn. They align structures with the sky, because the sky is universal. The pyramid, then, becomes a message written in geometry. The height, base, slope, orientation. Everything becomes a sentence in an ancient language of proportion. Perhaps the builders sought to map the Earth's dimensions, embedding the polar radius and equatorial curvature into the pyramid's geometry. Perhaps they encoded astronomical cycles, marking the long precession that spans 26,000 years. Perhaps they built chambers attuned to frequencies that resonate at healing or meditative levels, believing that sound could connect the physical and the spiritual, an idea found in traditions across the ancient world. The mainstream view, however, pushes back firmly. It argues that Egyptians were brilliant architects, capable of astonishing feats with simple tools and vast manpower. This is true. The Egyptians demonstrated immense ingenuity, but the mainstream insists that they developed all their skills internally without inheritance from an earlier civilization. It preserves a linear timeline: crude beginnings, gradual advancements, peak achievements. Yet the anomalies remain. The astronomical alignments dating to epochs far older than Khufu, the erosion patterns on the Sphinx, the mysterious subterranean features beneath the plateau, the missing capstone, the mathematical constants, the acoustic phenomena. These elements align too cleanly with a worldview of cycles, cosmology, and pre-cataclysmic memory. This tension brings you deeper into the heart of the pyramid, where the grand theory begins to crystallize. Picture yourself inside the grand gallery again. The walls slope upward in perfect symmetry, forming a corridor that narrows towards the king's chamber. Light flickers from your imagined torch, revealing smooth granite surfaces. The air feels heavy, charged, as if carrying an echo from centuries past. You sense that the builders of this space understood resonance, not through modern physics, but through observed harmonics, how sound behaves in intersecting planes of stone, how vibrations travel through granite beams. In this imagined ancient world, sound might have been more than physics. It was ritual. It was medicine. It was communication with the divine. And perhaps the pyramid amplified these frequencies, turning the entire structure into a resonant instrument meant to harmonize with the Earth's natural vibrations. Some researchers have measured electromagnetic anomalies near the pyramid. Strange readings, slight fluctuations. Nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest that the structure interacts subtly with the surrounding environment. If the pyramid was designed as a stabilizer, a grounding point for the Earth's energy field, or a marker of the planet's axial alignment, then the king's chamber may have been the focal point, a place where vibrations, frequencies, and geometry converged. Imagine monks, priests, or astronomers standing within the chamber, chanting in specific tones that caused the room to vibrate. Imagine rituals designed not for worship alone, but for maintaining the memory of cosmic cycles, for marking epochs and predicting celestial events. Imagine the ancient builders using stone as a repository of spiritual and scientific understanding. This is not fantasy. Many ancient cultures used sound in architecture. Temples in India, Greece, and Malta have acoustics tuned for chanting. Megalithic sites in Britain and Ireland use resonance to create trance-like experiences. The correlation between architecture, sound, and cosmology is well documented across early civilizations. So why not the Great Pyramid? From this perspective, the pyramid becomes a device of cultural transmission, a stone book of frequencies, proportions, and alignments. It tells a story, but not in words. It speaks through geometry. This is where the climax of the narrative begins to rise, a convergence of all these elements into a single, breathtaking possibility, a possibility tied to catastrophe. Imagine a world where the ancient civilization that first conceived the pyramid faced a series of devastating events. Perhaps it began with climate change, a shift in rainfall patterns, famine, drought. Perhaps it was followed by earthquakes, floods, or even cosmic impacts. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that fragments of a comet may have struck Earth around 12,900 years ago, igniting wildfires, injecting soot into the atmosphere, and triggering rapid cooling. The survivors of such cataclysm would have been few, scattered, traumatized. They would have held on to what knowledge they could. Over centuries, their descendants would rebuild, but the memory of the Golden Age, the first time, would become myth. The sky would change. The rivers would shift. The pyramid builders of this renewed world would cling to fragments of ancient wisdom, perhaps using the remnants of earlier structures or blueprints. Across millennia, the knowledge would erode. Rituals would remain but lose meaning. Geometry would be preserved but misinterpreted. The true purpose of the pyramid would fade, replaced by new stories, stories of gods, kings, and afterlives. The Old Kingdom Egyptians, brilliant in their own right, might see the ancient monument and adopt it into their cosmology, adding temples, causeways, and inscriptions, integrating it into their own world. But the core of the pyramid, the chamber, the proportions, the alignments, would remain a silent witness to a lost age. In this climactic moment, the theory reaches its apex. The Great Pyramid was not the beginning of Egyptian civilization. It was the inheritance of something older, a relic built at the hinge point between worlds, one world ending in catastrophe, another beginning in rebirth. Now imagine the cataclysm in detail. not as myth, but as a sensory event. Picture a sky streaked with fire, fragments of ice and rock entering Earth's atmosphere, creating sonic booms heard across continents. Imagine floods rushing through valleys, swallowing cities. Imagine the Nile roaring with unprecedented force, reshaping its banks. Imagine survivors seeking higher ground, carving memories into stone so that future generations would remember, not the disaster itself, but the cycle of destruction and renewal. The pyramid, then, stands as a reminder. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge grows and fades. Cataclysms wipe away entire worlds, and the survivors, clinging to memory, rebuild with whatever fragments they can carry. As you stand at the imagined edge of this ancient disaster in your mind, the pyramid becomes not a tomb, but a witness to fire and flood, to silence and survival. A structure that endured even when the culture that conceived it collapsed. And now, thousands of years later, it whispers again, not in words, but in proportions, alignments, and enigmas. The open-ended conclusion begins to settle like sand around your thoughts. Perhaps the pyramid is not meant to give us answers. Perhaps its purpose is not to reveal the truth, but to remind us that truth is cyclical, like the earth's wobble, like the rise and fall of empires, like the slow erosion of stone itself. The Great Pyramid stands not as a monument to a king, but as a quiet question carved in stone. Who were we before we forgot ourselves? Maybe the builders wanted future civilizations, future children of Earth, to look back and wonder, to ask questions, to piece together the fragments, to sense the weight of history not as a straight line, but as a spiral. And maybe that is the true gift of the pyramid, not certainty, but curiosity. You picture the pyramid now in complete darkness, its silhouette blending into the night sky. Stars shimmer above it in their ancient patterns, shifting slowly across epochs. The desert wind brushes against the stones. The monument breathes in silence. And in that silence, one final thought lingers like a heartbeat beneath the sand. If the past could build something that survives the collapse of worlds, what might our own civilization choose to leave behind? Only the stone knows, and the stone is patient.